Our love for God is not the gospel. The gospel is this: God's love for you. I'm not putting the pulpit up here just for power trips. I think I can't see anymore. I'm turning into an old woman. That's what happens when you have 2 kids. Uh, so yeah, thank you for this opportunity to come and just share a word that I felt on God's heart before we have communion together as a family. Last weekend, Dan and I actually went to a wedding, and of course, we were late to the wedding thanks to our favorite person, Judah. So by the time we arrived, the groom had actually he had too many people coming to the wedding, and so there was only one seat left at the table. And if you know Dan, he hates being late, so he wasn't very impressed by that. I ended up spending the whole entire wedding sitting on Dan's knee and the whole reception and eating my dinner and everything. And honestly, it was kind of a nice thing for me. I don't get to do that all the time. But for Dan, I can't say he had the same experience. Also because I kept like being in front of him, so he couldn't see anything. So he just sat there, and he was pretty sure he wasn't invited as the plus one, but I promised him he was. So it was a great experience for me. But unlike that wedding, we come to this communion table today, and there's plenty of seats. There's plenty of seats for everyone at this table. But it got me thinking about how we're sitting. So I wanted to go to the Last Supper today as we kind of come here and turn to John chapter 13, 18 to 30. So this is John's depiction of the Last Supper. So we join Jesus, Peter, and John and the rest of the disciples as they're sitting around the table. So you've got Jesus, Peter, John to some degree. And dinner's just been eaten. There's crumbs everywhere. They've just finished. And then Jesus has said something that makes everybody's stomach tightened. One of you will betray me. And around the table, the disciples all kind of shift uncomfortably. But 2 of them stand out, not by what they say, but with how they're sitting. Ask him, Peter whispers to John with his eyes wide open. Ask him what? John blinks. Jesus probably raises his eyebrow and says nothing, probably takes another sip of wine, because this is an emotional moment. He's about to call out his friend for betraying him. This is not an easy conversation. And Peter leans closer into to John, and goes, ask Jesus who's going to betray him. And John sighs like someone who's used to Peter's dramatics and moves into Jesus anyway and says, Lord, who is it? Then we read that Jesus dips a piece of bread, this is a shortened version, in the dish and hands it to Judas. And everyone at the table freezes. Peter is stunned. John stays close. One presses in quietly, and the other hesitates and asks from a distance. We have 2 disciples, both deeply devoted to Jesus, but responding to Jesus in this situation in very different ways. And I believe that there's an important word in here for us today. First, we've got John. In John 13:25, we read that it's leaning back against to Jesus. He asks, Lord, who is this? And there's a lot of interpretations of the Last Supper, mainly because they're not sitting in seats and thrones, and they're probably leaning a little bit on each other. But have you ever stopped to imagine John actually leaning into Jesus? The Message describes this as John was reclining against Jesus. And in the Greek, it's translated as leaning back on Jesus' chest or bosom, as they said. Or the New Revised Standard Version, I just found this and I had to read it because it said it was reclining close to his heart. Can you picture this? Imagine reclining and listening to Jesus' actual heartbeat. And in that moment, it's probably not going very slow because he's just called out his friend. So it's probably like, ugh. And John is just leaning into that. I love what St. Augustine says, and I've got to read it right. This disciple reclining on Jesus' breast drank in secret what he would later pour out openly in his gospel. For who could better speak the secrets of the heart than he who lay upon the heart of Christ? We're so aware that John knows how loved he is. He identifies himself 5 times in that gospel as saying the disciple who Jesus loves. And he even mentions it as the disciple who Jesus loved was leaning against Jesus's heart. It was so cool. And I used to roll my eyes at that and be like, oh gosh, John, seriously? A bit full of yourself, mate. I think, but it was definitely a snap judgment, and God's totally rebuked me for that one. He said, John's love for Jesus is unmistakable. Though he had no special access that any of the other disciples at that table had, he understood the full weight of Christ's love for him. And he could literally sit with that. He didn't claim special privilege, he claimed his identity, and he knew how deeply God loved him. By referring to himself as the disciple who God loved, Jesus loved, John isn't just acknowledging a fact, he's embracing an identity. He knows God loves him personally and profoundly. And I like John Piper's way, he puts it beautifully, saying, he's saying this about John, my most important identity is not my name, but my being loved by Jesus, the Son of God. I'm loved. I'm loved. I'm loved. That's who I am. I'm loved by Jesus. How many of us can truly say that today? That our identity isn't even rooted in our given names. Elesha Gordon, who's she? No, I am rooted in the love that Jesus has for me. That's who I am. That's what I do. That's how I'm known. But I'm simply, deeply, personally loved by him. But I know for many of us, the answer to the question can actually be found in Peter. Because in verse 24, we see Peter leans in towards John, not Jesus. He motions him and whispers, ask Jesus who he means. Peter wants to know, he needs to know who Jesus is referring to, but he asks from a distance. His posture is one of caution, perhaps even fear. He's hesitant to hear the answer. What if Jesus called him out? It's a telling picture. Peter asking John to talk to Jesus for him, but then John was sitting there feeling Jesus's heartbeat. If I was to ask you how you're personally postured towards Jesus this morning as we come to communion, would you be leaning intimately against his chest, or would you trying to hear from him through someone else or something? Maybe you're here right now because you're hungry to hear from him, but that's what songs and sermons are there for, right? Are you leaning in with trust, or are you lingering at a distance, still wondering if you're allowed that kind of intimacy? It would be so easy right now to just be like, change your postures. Come on, swap seats with Jesus. I mean, John, and go and sit by Jesus. Put your head on his chest. Cool, we're done. But how can you truly experience that this morning, the way that John did, when we don't have that same frame of reference? When hoping in Jesus' love feels risky, when trusting in his love feels dangerous, when deep down we're not sure how Jesus would respond if we brought him our real questions, the ones we barely let ourselves ask. Because sometimes, if we're honest, it feels safer to keep him at arm's length, to be seated further down the table. Not because we don't want him, but because we're not even sure if we really like him, or if he'll still want us if he saw all of us. And that's why I loved what Alison said in her prophetic word last week about how often we get that ragged edges of our lives kind of get in the way of presenting ourselves to God. We think like, tidy up first, let me sound a bit more faithful, let me bring the polished versions of my questions. But we're still approaching him through that old covenant thinking. Like Peter, we act as if he's distant, as if access to him has to be earned, as if his voice and his love has to be earned. Old covenant thinking says, I must prove I'm worthy to come close. It says only certain people like John over there can hear and be near to God. It whispers, if you haven't performed well, I should probably keep my distance. But new covenant thinking, which we see in this table today, it's the one sealed by Jesus' own blood, says something completely different. It says, come close. It says, you are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. John 15:3. It says, I no longer call you servants, I have called you friends. It invites you, like John, to lean in, not because you've earned the place, but because you're loved. John leaned in not because he had it figured out or was better than anyone else, but because he knew he was loved. Our love for God is not the good news. Our love for God is not the gospel. The gospel is this: God's love for you. You didn't love him first. He loved you first. And Strong Coleman puts it, the question isn't does God love us, but whether we'll allow the fact that he already does to become that experience reality in our lives. This isn't easy to hear, and I've resisted it. But I believe that this is something we need to hear today. You're loved, you're beloved. So this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his son. So I invite you this morning in this time of communion to posture yourself as the beloved of Jesus, not strangers, not servants, not distant friends, but those as deeply loved by Christ. As you come and receive the elements that Jesus has lovingly given to you, come as John did, not because of your performance, but because of your proximity. This table here is not a reward for the worthy. It's not for the spiritually confident. It's not a test of your love for God. It's a declaration of his love for you. You're not just taking his broken body, as we see in these beautifully cut pieces of bread, the sacrifice, the pain and cost. You're not just taking that, but you're also taking the sweet juice, a rich reminder of not only his blood poured out, but his love that poured into all of us, that new covenant sealed in grace and hope. He dwells in us now. This is what this represents partly. In the juice, we taste the joy of his love, and in the bread, we remember the cost. Come, my beloved, come, be loved, come. You might not get it fully today, but I encourage you to come and try out his love. The table is here when you're ready for it. Go for it.